If this story touched your heart even a little, let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Maybe you're in a quiet room in Texas or on a rainy evening somewhere in Manila. Wherever you are, you're part of this little storytelling family now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because tomorrow's tale is even more special, and we'd hate for you to miss it. See you in the comments, and see you in the next story. It was just after 8 a.m. on a chilly Thursday morning in the quiet town of Maplewood, Ohio. The streets were still waking up, and the aroma of fresh coffee drifted from the local diner on Main Street, one of the only places that felt alive before 9. Inside, the bell above the door jingled as Ethan Cole, a sharply dressed man in his late 30s, stepped in, holding his 6-year-old son's hand. His tailored navy coat, polished shoes, and the Bluetooth earpiece still clinging to his ear didn't quite match the rustic, laid-back charm of the diner, but he didn't care. Ethan wasn't there for charm. He was there because he had a meeting in 30 minutes and needed something hot to eat, fast. They took a seat near the window. Caleb, his son, pressed his face against the glass, tracing imaginary patterns with his finger while Ethan pulled out his phone and tapped through emails. Moments later, a young waitress approached with a soft smile and a notepad. Her name was Madeline Brooks, 24, juggling early morning shifts to pay for nursing school. She greeted them politely, recommended the daily special, and took down their order: black coffee, 2 scrambled eggs, toast with butter, and chocolate chip pancakes for the little one. 15 minutes passed. Ethan glanced at his watch, fidgeted with his sleeve, and muttered under his breath. When the food finally arrived, the tension snapped. "This isn't what I ordered," Ethan said sharply, eyeing the plate of sunny-side-up eggs in front of him. "I'm so sorry," Madeline replied, already reaching for the plate. "I can take this back, and—" "I don't have time for that," he interrupted, his voice growing louder. "You had one job. Eggs, scrambled. How hard is that?" Heads turned from nearby tables. Caleb stopped drawing and looked up, wide-eyed. Madeline froze for a second, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the plate. "I really am sorry," she said, quieter this time. "It must have been a kitchen mix-up." Ethan exhaled through his nose, clearly frustrated. He rubbed his temples, then waved her off with a stiff hand. "Just bring me black coffee, that's all." As Madeline turned to walk away, her cheeks flushed pink and her chest tight with embarrassment, she heard a small voice call out. "It's okay," Caleb said gently, his voice barely above a whisper. "Daddy always gets grumpy when he's hungry." A pause, then a few soft chuckles from neighboring tables. Madeline stopped, glanced over her shoulder, and for the first time that morning, smiled. What started as a tense, uncomfortable moment had just taken a surprising turn thanks to the honesty of a 6-year-old. Madeline stood frozen for a second, plate in hand, her back half turned toward the table. Caleb's innocent words hung in the air like a soft breeze after a storm. Daddy always gets grumpy when he's hungry. The moment cracked something. Not just the tension in the room, but something inside her too. She let out a quiet breath and looked back at the little boy, who now offered her a sheepish smile and a small, apologetic shrug, as if he were somehow responsible for his father's behavior. Ethan glanced sideways at his son, clearly caught off guard. His frown didn't soften immediately, but he didn't say anything either. Instead, he looked down at his phone again, trying to regain control of the situation, of himself. But something had shifted. The harsh edge in his posture had dulled, just slightly. Still holding the plate, Madeline made a decision. She walked back to the kitchen, replaced the order without saying a word to the cook, then grabbed a small cup of chocolate milk from behind the counter, extra whipped cream on top, no charge, no note, just something quiet, something kind. She walked it back to the table and set it gently in front of Caleb. "For the bravest guy in the room," she said softly, smiling at him. Caleb's face lit up. "Wow, thanks." She turned to walk away again, But this time she didn't get far. "Wait," Ethan called out, his voice lower now, calmer. "Look, I shouldn't have snapped. It's been a rough morning. That's not your fault." Madeline turned back, surprised. "It's okay. I get it." He nodded, almost ashamed. "I wasn't exactly polite." "No," she said with a half smirk. "You weren't." They both chuckled awkwardly, and for a fleeting second, it felt like the tension had dissolved completely. But then, just as quickly, Ethan's phone rang again, sharp, urgent. He picked it up, muttering into the receiver. "Yeah, I'm still at the diner. No, reschedule the call. I don't care. Just move it." He hung up, ran a hand through his hair, and looked at his son. Caleb had already opened the coloring page. Madeline had slid onto the table beside the milk. He was drawing a superhero, he said, one who smiled even when things went wrong. Madeline watched from a distance, leaning casually against the counter. She wasn't eavesdropping. Not exactly, but there was something in her that couldn't look away from the little boy, who somehow stayed cheerful, even with a father who barely looked up from his phone. The bell above the door chimed again. More customers walking in. But Madeline's mind was still back at that table. The man might have been cold and sharp, but his son was warm, funny, gentle. She didn't know it yet, but this wouldn't be their last conversation. Something had started in that moment, something more important than any wrong breakfast. Order. The second time Madeline approached their table, she didn't carry plates, just a fresh set of crayons and a cup of warm water for the coffee Ethan never drank. Caleb had been sitting quietly, still coloring his superhero, humming something soft under his breath. When he saw her, his eyes lit up again. "I added a cape," he said proudly, holding up his drawing. "His name's Captain Kind." Madeline laughed. "That's a good one. I think the world needs more of him." Ethan glanced up from his phone, clearly still juggling a dozen mental tabs. But something in Madeline's voice made him pause. He looked at her, really looked this time, not as the waitress who got his order wrong, but as a person. Someone, patient, someone who just made his son smile brighter than he had in weeks. "Thanks," he muttered, "for being good with him. He doesn't usually open up to strangers." Madeline shrugged. "Kids know who's safe. That's not something you can fake." There was a beat of silence. Ethan blinked, then looked down, almost embarrassed by her words. She didn't mean it to shame him, but somehow it still landed. "I'm Madeline, by the way," she added, extending her hand. "Ethan," he replied, "and that's Caleb." Caleb waved, smudging his drawing with a blue crayon in the process. "My mum used to draw with me too," he said suddenly, without looking up. The words cut through the air like a pin dropping on tile. Ethan froze. Madeline did too. There was a quiet ache behind the boy's voice, one no child should know. Ethan cleared his throat, eyes darting away from Madeline's. "She passed last year," he said softly. "Car accident." Madeline's heart sank. She looked back at Caleb, who was still drawing, completely unfazed. Kids grieve differently. They carry pain in their pockets, pulling it out in fragments when the world feels safe enough to listen. "I'm sorry," she said, barely above a whisper. "She must have been amazing." "She was," Ethan said, then took a sip of his now lukewarm coffee. After that, the energy at the table shifted. It wasn't warm, not yet, but it wasn't cold anymore. It was something in between. Honest. Quiet. Real. Madeline came by more often, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Caleb kept talking, asking her questions, what her favourite superhero was, if she'd ever flown on a plane, whether she liked waffles or pancakes more. She answered all of them like it mattered. Because to him, it did. By the time they stood up to leave, Ethan left a generous tip on the table and for the first time smiled at her. "We might be back next week," he said casually. Madeline just nodded, but her heart skipped a beat. As the bell above the door jingled again, and the two of them disappeared into the morning light. She stood still for a moment, wiping down the table with a little more care than usual. She didn't know it yet, but she hadn't just served breakfast that morning. She'd started becoming someone's safe place. The following week, they came back. Same time, same table. Ethan didn't say much when they walked in, just nodded toward Madeline and gave a polite, almost awkward smile. Caleb, on the other hand, rushed to their usual booth like it was reserved royalty seating. Madeline had saved a few new colouring sheets just in case. She wasn't sure they'd return, but something in her gut told her they would. She didn't know why, but that boy had left a mark on her. And maybe, just maybe, she'd left one on him too. "Captain Kind is back," Caleb declared, pulling out his superhero drawing and adding a few new flames to the cape. Madeline leaned in. "He looks braver than ever," Ethan chuckled under his breath, setting his phone aside for once. "He's been talking about coming back here all week." "Oh yeah?" she asked, surprised. "He said this place has the best chocolate." "Milk," Ethan smirked. "And the best company." Madeline smiled, and this time, it reached her eyes. Over the next few visits, it became a rhythm. They'd show up once, sometimes twice a week. Madeline started to memorize their order without writing it down. Caleb started saving stories just for her, telling her about school, asking if she had any pets, even inviting her, very seriously, to his next soccer game. She wasn't family, she wasn't a teacher, she wasn't anyone official. But somehow, she became the only person outside of Ethan who really saw the boy, and maybe the only one he trusted enough to open up to. One afternoon, when the diner was slow, Madeline sat with Caleb for a moment while Ethan stepped outside to take a call. The boy had been quieter that day, swirling his straw through melting ice. "Hey, bud," she said gently. "You okay?" He shrugged, then leaned his head against her arm. "Sometimes Daddy gets really sad," he whispered. "He thinks I don't see it. But I do." Madeline swallowed hard. "Grown-ups try to be strong all the time," she said. "But it's okay to be sad too." Caleb looked up at her, wide-eyed. "Do you get sad?" "All the time," she said, nodding. "But talking helps, and friends help." The boy nodded slowly, like he was trying to store that truth away for later. When Ethan came back in, he paused at the sight. His son, leaning against a waitress he barely knew a few weeks ago, looking more at peace than he had in months. There was no pretending, no performance, just connection. That night, after they left, Madeline found a note tucked under Caleb's empty glass. "Thank you for being kind to my son. He hasn't smiled this much since she passed." "E," she read, it twice, then 3 times. Her hands trembled just slightly as she tucked the note into her apron pocket. What had started with a messed-up egg order had somehow turned into something far more important. Trust. The weeks turned into months. Every Tuesday and Saturday morning, like clockwork, Ethan and Caleb would walk into the diner. Caleb no longer needed encouragement. He'd push the door open first, wave at Madeline from across the room, and race to their booth by the window. The little boy who once stared out silently now filled the air with questions, jokes, and the occasional superhero monologue over pancakes. And Ethan, he changed too. He started putting his phone away when they sat down. He drank the coffee while it was still hot. He listened to his son more closely. He laughed more easily. It wasn't a dramatic shift, but real change rarely is. It's slow, quiet, like sunlight gradually warming a cold room. Madeline became more than just their waitress. She became part of their routine, part of their story. One chilly November afternoon, after soccer practice, Caleb came in still wearing his cleats, proudly holding a participation ribbon. Madeline crouched beside the booth and high-fived him like he'd won gold. "You wanna come to my recital next week?" Caleb asked, mid-bite of his grilled cheese. Madeline blinked. "Your school recital?" "Yeah," he nodded. We're singing, "You Are My Sunshine." Daddy says it was Mum's favorite. She glanced at Ethan, unsure if she'd crossed a line, but Ethan didn't flinch. He simply looked at her, then at his son, and nodded. "We'd love to have you there," he said. Madeline sat back, stunned. No one had ever said that to her before, not with that kind of warmth. "We'd love to have you there," like she mattered, like she belonged. The night of the recital came fast. The small elementary school auditorium buzzed with parents, teachers, and awkward camera phones. Madeline stood near the back, unsure if she even had a right to be there, until she saw Caleb on stage scanning the crowd. When his eyes landed on her, he grinned so big she thought his cheeks might burst. He waved, both hands up in the air like he'd spotted a celebrity. Ethan turned in his seat, gave her a small wave, and then scooted to make room beside him. She sat down. As the children began singing, Caleb's eyes never left hers. His voice wobbled a little, but his smile never faded. And for the first time since his mum's passing, Ethan saw something in his son's face that had been missing for a long time: joy. After the performance, they walked to the parking lot together. Caleb skipped ahead, chasing his own shadow, under the streetlights. "Thanks for coming," Ethan said quietly. "Thanks for inviting me," Madeline replied. Then, after a pause, she added, "You're doing a good job, you know, with him." He looked at her, eyes tired but grateful. "Only because I had some unexpected help." They stood there for a second too long, silence thick but not uncomfortable. Sometimes, family isn't made by blood. Sometimes it's made in small-town diners, in colouring pages and chocolate milk, in messy moments and second chances. And sometimes a wrong breakfast order can change everything. We'd love to know, what part of this story touched your heart the most? Was it Caleb's innocent honesty, Madeline's quiet kindness, or Ethan's slow journey back to emotional warmth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've ever met someone unexpectedly who changed your life, even just a little, we want to hear about it. Sometimes the most meaningful connections come from the most ordinary places. A local diner, a kind gesture, a child's laugh. This story reminds us that healing doesn't always happen in grand gestures. It's found in small, sincere moments that we often overlook. Tell us where you're watching from. We're building a global family of storytellers here, and your voice matters. Whether you're in New York, Manila, Sydney, or a quiet little town somewhere in between, your story belongs here too. And hey, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because tomorrow's story will take you on another emotional ride, one you won't want to miss. Let the comments be a place of kindness, reflection, and maybe even healing. We're listening.